Welcome to the only show bringing cops and the community together for some real talk and some real listening. This is uncut. This is uncensored. This is Black and Blue Live. Hey, welcome to Black and Blue Live, everybody. How you doing out there? My name is Dale. I am the host. And as you see today, my co-host Elizabeth is not here today. She's feeling a little under the weather. So welcome my man, Captain Ben over there. What's going on, Ben?
What's happening, brother? I am not Elizabeth. I want y'all to know that Elizabeth's much prettier than I am.
Much prettier than you are. But
hey, but I like my nice shiny haircuts. And,
yes.
I'm ready, bro. I'm excited.
All right.
Let's do this.
Yes, let's do this. Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff to get in here today. We're going to talk about, fallen officers in the line of duty. All of us here are law enforcement, so we're going to talk about that. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us here on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, everything that we are on. Please like and subscribe to the show on all of those platforms, and very much appreciate that. So send in your comments and your questions, and we will make sure we get those here on screen. As you see the banner there on the bottom. Good evening from Chicago, from Sean Kennedy. Thank you for tuning in there, Sean. It looked like you were there on LinkedIn, so thank you for that. And before we get going here,
stand up.
Chi-Town, exactly. Let me do something here with the merchandise up. Let's see, here we go. I want to remind everybody to go to the merch store. You can get yourself some good merch that we just recently opened. There's a black and blue t-shirt there. We got all kinds of hoodies and all that. We got jacket. Look at that jacket. That looks fly, don't it? Get on that fly there. It says yeah, so make sure you get over there and check that out right now at the merch store and Black and Blue, and that'll be us. All right, on the website, www.blackandblue.
I'm still trying to get one of them black and blue ball caps, bro.
Hey, you part of the show. We're going to hook you up. Everyone doesn't know, Ben is on the show now because he and I are going to do another kind of show here momentarily, shortly. We're going to do one little different than this show, but it's still going to be two cops just talking mess, and we're going to have fun with that. We're going to launch that this summer. So this is kind of a dry run, but Ben's good people, and we're going to get into this topic here today. Today, like the banner said, we're going to talk about law enforcement officers that have fallen in the line of duty. Our job is dangerous, and right now we've got a lot of things going on. Officers have fallen left and right, and we want to talk about that. These officers here are talking about officers in their department that have fallen. So let's bring those people on right here. Our first guest here today is the chief of the Department of Public Safety for the University of Southern California out here in the LA area. He's got 36 years of experience. Everyone, please help us welcome in Chief John Thomas. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, and thank you for inviting me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, how's your Sunday shaping out?
Sunday is great so far. My Dodgers won, so I cannot complain.
All right. Yes, can't complain about that. All right. And they beat the Giants, is that right?
The rivals, the hated Giants, yes.
All right.
Yes,
so it's a good day for you. Good day for you.
It's a good day. A very good day.
All right. Our next guest here is with the Indianapolis Metro Police Department in Indianapolis Metro. She's got 5 years experience on it. She's going to talk about an officer that fell in the line of duty there. Everyone, please help us welcome in Officer Simone Burris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. How's things going on out there in Indy?
It's beautiful today. Beautiful weather, nice and
today.
calm. So we'll take it.
All right, appreciate you for coming on. And last but certainly not least, he is a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, here to talk about an officer that perished with their department a few years ago. He's got 26 years of experience there. Everyone, please help us welcome in Detective Craig Marquez. How's it going, brother?
Doing great. Weather's perfect here.
As usual.
As usual. Terrible. 66.
Yes,
Terrible.
yes.
I don't know how we can do it.
It's a little on the chilly side, right, Craig?
Yes, need a jacket.
All right, let's button this up. Let's button this up, everybody. We're going to get into this topic here. Here we go. All right, so our topic today is in the line of duty. We're going to talk about some officers that have fallen in the line of duty, not just the officers that we bring up here today. We'll talk about officers all across our great nation that have fallen in the line of duty. Feel free, ladies and gentlemen, to comment in the comment section of anyone that you know of that is perishing. Give them a little love for their department, their family, and yourselves as well. So, Chief Thomas, you're here to talk about an officer that perished at your department. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that officer, and then I'll bring up some pictures here. Who are you here representing today?
Yeah, I'm representing Officer Keith Lawrence. Keith Lawrence joined our department probably 6 months or so. It was definitely less than a year prior to being killed in the line of duty. And for those that are not familiar, Keith Lawrence and his fiancee, Monica Kwan, were the first two victims of Dorner. And Dorner would go on to kill several other Southern California law enforcement officers. Dorner was previously a Los Angeles police officer, as I was prior to coming on to retiring and going to USC. But he had a vendetta. He felt that he was wronged by the department, unjustly fired, and in his rage and anger and his psychosis, he decided that he would take it out on law enforcement. And literally, Keith Lawrence and Monica, and the connection with those two was he was represented in a Board of Rights hearing that didn't go well for him, that ultimately led to his termination. Monica Kwan's father, Randy Kwan, was a retired LAPD captain, and he represented him. So he had a vendetta and felt that he should have been represented better. That resulted in the outcome that he did not desire, which led to his termination. So he had a vendetta regarding, had to do with his belief that he was summarily terminated without cause. He believed that there was some racial animus, and he went on a shooting spree that literally terrorized Southern California law enforcement for quite a while. And the first two victims were Monica Kwan, the daughter of Randy Kwan, retired LAPD officer, and my officer, who was Monica's fiance. He ambushed them both while they were sitting in the car in their condo complex in Irvine. So that was the motivation behind it. But he would go on to kill several other law enforcement officers on a week-long terror vendetta.
Yeah, and let me bring up a picture of Monica and Keith there. That's them. And also got another pic of them. It's like at his graduation of some sort.
Right.
Probably from the academy there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Terrible all the way around. All right, Simone, why don't you tell everybody who you're here to represent?
So I am here representing Officer Brianne Leith. She was joined our department with the 16th recruit class. So she had roughly 2.5 years on with the department. Officer Leith came in, and of course she was a light to our community. She took a 911 run on a domestic disturbance, a domestic disturbance that also involved weapons. She responded as per our protocol with her beat partners. They all strategically approached the door. She knocked on the door, and unfortunately, the suspect inside began to fire rifle rounds through the door and through the wall of that complex, and it struck Officer Leith. fatally wounding her. And she did not survive those injuries on scene.
Yeah, that's terrible. Those are people don't realize, but responding to domestics is one of the most dangerous types of calls that we can go on as law enforcement, and that this happens all the time, and it's unfortunate because when we go there, the people, it's already a heated situation, and then we get into it,
Absolutely.
and then we interject ourselves into it, after someone calls or what have you, and we go there, and it's just bad all the way around. So people don't realize that domestics and traffic accidents are two of the top killers of law enforcement officers. And segueing into that, Detective Marquez, why don't you tell everybody who you're here to represent?
Thank you. I'm here to represent our Nicholas Lee, Officer Nicholas Lee. He was an officer assigned to Hollywood Division Patrol, and I was assigned at that time to Hollywood Division as a detective. So we worked in the same division. We had worked together on several details as well as out in several calls together. And on the day that he was tragically killed, he and his partner were responding to a call. And for those not familiar with Hollywood, Hollywood is one of these places where outside of Disneyland, it's one of the most visited places in Los Angeles and in Southern California for that matter. And because of the amount of people that flock to Hollywood, a lot of the streets around there, like Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood Boulevard, that people see get crowded and have an immense amount of traffic. So if you work there as a police officer, as a detective, you have to be familiar with shortcuts, streets that you can get through. And in this day, he did. He took a shortcut through a street that actually goes into the city of Beverly Hills. Unfortunately, as he traveled on that road, a truck driver also had the same idea apparently, and used that road as a shortcut, and was in quite a rush, was driving recklessly with his big rig, and his big rig veered off and struck the patrol vehicle that Officer Lee was driving, and killed him, tragically killed him, and injured his partner at the same time.
Wow. And what's your relationship to Officer Lee? Craig, did you work with him over there? Or?
Yes, we work together. It's like one of these things, right? And I'm sure we'll get into it. It's you work with each other, but when something tragic like this happens, it's you get tons of regret that you didn't savor every second. And I think
Yes.
that's you sit there, each other, you joke around with each other, you play playful banter and conversation in passing, but I don't think we all savor that. So when I learned that he had passed away and that he was the victim of this accident, it's like that regret that automatically hits you. It's like, did you make the most out of every second you had with that person?
Yeah, exactly. Simone, where were you when you heard the news about Officer Lee?
Uh, I was actually sitting in my patrol car with two other colleagues of mine, and we're community resource officers, so we don't take the 911 calls essentially, but we assist officers in the area of our East District. So we were sitting in an area that is a high traffic area for us, and we heard over the radio that it first came out as shots fired, is what everybody heard. So as we backed on to the run, we started to head in that direction. Immediately after, we heard officer down. Uh, we flipped our lights on, started to head to the scene. I think we got there. It seemed like it took us forever to get there. Um, we weren't far away, but it just seemed like forever. It took forever to get there.
Yeah.
And she was still inside the apartment complex. We could hear the officers on the radio trying to come up with a plan to get her out of the building. The guy was still firing rounds through the doors. So it was a very chaotic situation. By the time we made it to the scene, they had just pulled her out of the apartment complex. And when I got on scene, she was laying there in that apartment complex parking lot.
Yeah, yeah. Terrible scene, I'm sure, for you to have to experience
Oh
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Chief Thomas, where were you when you got the word?
Well, I'll never forget it. It was Super Bowl Sunday. Super Bowl Sunday, 49ers versus the Ravens. And I've just finished looking at the Super Bowl, and I remember getting a call from an Irvine detective. And keep in mind, nobody knew what we had at that point. Nobody knew Dorner's
Yeah.
name had never popped up or anything. So I get a call that evening from an Irvine detective asking me, do I have an officer that drives a white Kia? So he didn't tell me directly what they had. He says, he just asked me a series of questions. Do you have an officer that drives a white Kia? Well, I've got 300 something officers. How am I going to know that? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, we have a vehicle, and there's a USC parking permit in it. This could be one of your officers. Well, what do you have? Then I got vagueness, no clear cut answer. Literally, I told the detective, okay, call me back when you have some more information, because right now I can't answer your questions. And he calls back. In the meantime, I start checking to see whether I had any officers that possibly had vehicles like that, and then was able to determine through the parking permit number that it did belong to Keith Lawrence, and then called me back probably an hour later and says I have two deceased individuals in the car, and I believe one of them is your officer Keith Lawrence. That's how I found out. But again, Super Bowl Sunday, that evening, telephonic notification from the homicide detective, beginning the initial investigation. And at that point, no knowledge of Dorner or anything. Actually, I kind of thought maybe it was a double suicide, a suicide homicide. So I didn't know
Right.
what we had at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody knew. Nobody knew at that point. Yep. Real quick, on Facebook, Vivi V asked, what goes through your mind in that moment as you hear officer down, emotionally, fear, anger? You can talk about that, Simone, since you brought up that where you were.
Definitely in that moment, your heart stops a little bit. Um, you are definitely in disbelief, so you're processing a lot of emotions at a fast rate. You're trying to figure out, praying to God that it's not someone you know, um, praying that you can get there and help them or assist them in some kind of way, and then you're also just trying to ensure that, um, or hoping that the officer doesn't lose their life, essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
Definitely.
I um I experienced that myself back in 1991 when I was a brand new officer. We had an officer on our department that responded to a domestic call with his partner. We worked in the third shift, the overnight shift. So I want to say this was roughly about 4 o'clock in the morning or so, and it was a real foggy night in San Diego, and I can remember it very vividly. That suddenly there was a shots fired call, 1199, officer down, and trying to roll code to assist those officers. One of the officers had been shot, and with the fog and the darkness and everything else, it was just a real eerie scene. And when I arrived, the officers were working on the wounded officer, and you never forget scenes like that and experiences like that in your career. So I'm sure you won't forget, Simone.
Yeah. Yep.
Never.
Yeah. And, you know, Officer Leaf was a doting mom. She was a young mother. Got some pictures here of her and her son here. So yeah, beautiful kid, beautiful young lady as well. It looks like she did lots of pictures with him. She's in uniform, so yeah, beautiful family there. And look at him in her uniform. Isn't that just cute? So yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So what goes through your mind when you hear that, Craig? You know, with officer down. I mean, LAPD's had a number of officers over the years that
Um,
have, that have gone
yeah.
down.
The one that comes up was Phil Cuesta. I think Chief Thomas would remember when Officer Phil Cuesta was shot and killed in Southwest, and I was working that night. And I remember getting it in Ramparts, an adjoining division, but uh, in a big city, you get an address. And I remember when that call came out, and me and my partner was flying down the freeway, and the first thing I thought of is, where exactly is it? And this is before GPS. So I'm going to age myself, a Thomas guide, and I'm
Oh yeah,
literally trying to
we know
look
what
up.
those are.
We know what those are. I don't know if Simone knows what those are. She's a little young, but I'm bringing out the Thomas guide, trying to figure out where it is, and at a high rate of speed. Luckily, there was several patrol vehicles flying past us, and we said, "Well, they look like they know where they're going." And I remember as the patrol car passed us on the left, I looked back. I looked at the trunk and I saw a 05, which meant that it's a Harbor Patrol Division car. And thinking, okay, how did they beat us here? And I was like, well, I hope they know where they're going, because they're coming from the outside area. And I think the big thing is, and Simone kind of hit it on the head, is you want to do everything. When you get there, you want to do everything, and there's no possible way that you can you take a role. You have a very important role, but at that time, what was really eerie about this time was I got out of the car and I started walking to the command post. And by that time, we had approximately about 300 officers that had already rolled in. And I hear Craig. And usually, when we're in uniform, we usually don't hear our first name. And I turned around and I saw Brian Brown. Brian Brown would be murdered and killed in the line of duty several months later, ironically. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, where are you working at now?" And I told him I was working at Rampart and he was working at 77th. And he said, "Hey, let's go do this." He goes, "But whatever it is, don't leave without coming to talk to me after." We got tied up with our apparent roles and we never got back. And that was actually the last time I actually got a chance to talk to him. And several months later, he was murdered and killed in the line of duty as well, as a sorry twist of irony there. But it just goes, you get that sinking feeling, and you just want to do everything and you can't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'll add to all of that. And it's interesting as I hear these names, particularly Cuesta and Brian Brown, who lived in my neighborhood. Every single police officer, and I've been in this business now 30. I'm in my 37th year, and I've seen a lot of officers, unfortunately, die in the line of duty, working LAPD and working in Southern California, and it's just chaotic. And I think Simone and Craig both hit it right on the head. You want to do all you can, but you're also in the back of your mind, you're hoping, it's not someone that you know. Not that that really matters because we're all connected, but the reality is that does come in your mind. But I think probably the most important, the important thing, as I've seen through my career, is just you there's nothing that brings together an agency or a division in the case of an LAPD, is when an officer unfortunately gets lost, loses life in the line of duty. And I remember Dylan Brown. I remember that incident and seeing his little boy in the neighborhood and still talking to them. So it kind of like brings the whole law enforcement community together to ensure that the legacy doesn't stop with that loss. That the family has support. I didn't have that luxury with Keith, in the sense that it was such a huge news story. This wasn't just a one officer getting killed in the line of duty. Uh, we were all terrorized, terrified. I had to have a security detail from my city parked in front of my house. There were quite a few LAPD officers that had to have security at their homes because of the what was going on with Dorner. So it wasn't for me, and then being a chief and actually having only been appointed chief the month before, and then I have to deal with this huge tragedy. But I think it still hits you the same. It's a gut punch,
Yep.
and you never really recover because as I listen to these names, it brings back it just brings back the emotions. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about Keith's situation, the Dorner situation. It was a national story, but I still want to talk about some of the other officers that you mentioned that perished as well that day. So Officer Michael Crane was with the Riverside, California Police Department. The chain of events were when Monica and Keith were killed in Irvine. A few days later, when the manhunt was on, because nobody knew, I guess somehow the word got out that that Dorner was a suspect, because I guess he left a manifesto online. Is that correct, Chief?
He left a manifesto the next day,
The next day.
February 4th.
Yes. So he traveled east to Riverside, which is kind of in the area where I work in Riverside. And Officer Crane was a training officer, an FTO. He had a trainee with him. And late one night on February 7th, 2013, Dorner's vehicle pulled up to a stoplight. I believe it was right off the 91, right off the off-ramp there. And I guess he believed that the officers were looking for him, which they weren't, because this happened, 60 miles away. And he opened fire on their patrol vehicle and struck them both. And Officer Crane did not survive that encounter.
It's important to say, even before he actually struck and killed his next victim, which was Officer Crane, he and Craig, you were in LA. He terrorized the entire Southern California area.
Yes.
He was
Yeah.
popping up all over the place. So it wasn't, and I don't think he was really. His desire was to kill as many cops as he possibly could.
Yes.
So, and he was showing up at people's officers' residences, in neighborhoods. There were a lot of sightings before he actually, even though it was a very brief period between when he killed Keith and Monica, but he was sighted all over Southern California,
Yeah.
and continued to.
Yeah.
So
Because
I say that
vehicle
because
was in the system. Everyone was looking for that vehicle and for him at that point. Yeah.
yeah,
I remember that.
and I say that because it was it struck such very few incidents in my 37-year career have impacted law enforcement like that, because we really did not know what we had. All we knew is someone that had the same training that we had. He knew our tactics. He knew exactly how LAPD operated. He actually, was very familiar with how to avoid being detected, and he actually his plan of how he operated actually was pretty effective. So I think that had a lot to do with creating this environment in Southern California after Keith and Monica and after Michael Crane, and it just was it was a very tense environment.
Yeah. Absolutely was. And continuing on with those chain of events, a few days later, he was headed up the mountain towards Big Bear. think he carjacked someone up there, and that person got out and was able to call the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, and they found out he was in a cabin somewhere. So they surrounded the cabin, and they had a standoff there, and he started shooting outside of the cabin at the officers there. It was all hands on deck. Every agency in the area, including my agency, rolled up there. And in that firefight, a Detective Jeremiah McKay was struck and killed in that firefight as well. And then the sheriff's department handled that situation, and I guess Dorner set off the cabin with some fireworks and some fire, and burned the cabin down to the ground. When they got back in there, they found Dorner was deceased. So that was a crazy time. I remember that very well, very well. Yep.
Yeah, Dale. What's interesting is, just like Chief Thomas said here, Dorner really did set off an incident where pretty much all of Southern California law enforcement really unified and came together as one.
Yes.
Because, I mean, we had evidence that he was down in San Diego. We found some of his stuff in a trash can down in National City, right? So suddenly now all of San Diego is alerted for his presence. And then, and then out in Riverside County, up in Orange County, up in LA, everyone was looking for him. I myself actually did media about him and about his incident, that was both published on the internet and then a lot of live news. So it became a big thing for him. And what's interesting is a lot of folks didn't know that he was actually a part of one of our national organizations and had come to one of our conferences. So there were officers that knew him in the organization, the National Black Police Association.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That was bad all the way around. Bad all the way around. So, how did that death affect you guys personally? The deaths of the officers in your department. I know, Simone, you were kind of in the same age range, years on range as Officer Lee. How did that death affect you personally?
Personally, for me, I feel like just with being a new officer, and that's not an experience I've ever had before, it was very tragic for me to experience. Um, it was something that I had hoped I would never have to experience. Um, so there was a lot of feelings and emotions that um, I was unaware of that I would go through, a roller coaster of emotions, and feeling the survivor's remorse on, um, again, just feeling like why her out of all of the other people, or out of the suspect. Like there was a lot of emotions that were kind of unaddressed for me at the time, and having to go through counseling, having sleepless nights, even having the night terrors and nightmares about the incident, and just trying to figure out why I was upset, why I was angry. Again, I wasn't one of the first responding officers there. I came after the fact, so just feeling like I should have done more, and having to walk through that and deal with that. Um, I have to give my department a big shout out for allowing us to be equipped to read different types of material to help us through that. An emotional survivor for law enforcement. I believe if I hadn't read that book when I was first assigned to the department, I think I would have struggled even more. But having those skills on board and knowing what I could potentially face throughout this law enforcement career, I think that helped. Um, our wellness department, I think they stepped in and helped as best as they could for officers responding. But for me personally, I think I'm still on a journey. I don't think I'm fully through it, but I think I have reached a place where I'm able to cope and do my job, and not harbor the feelings of anger or vengeance or anything like that. So I think I'm in a healthy space now, When it first happened, I did have to take off a couple of days from work because I just couldn't wrap my mind around what had just happened. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Having that wellness component today is so important. I've been doing this for 31 and a half years, and we just didn't have it back in 1991 when Officer Davis was killed in San Diego, and I was on that scene. We didn't have the wellness resources that officers have today, right? And unfortunately, our wellness tended to be gathering together where alcohol was consumed, where people could kind of talk it out, and deal with it, and then everybody came back to work the next day like nothing happened, right? So I am so glad today that departments are getting on board with getting psych services and counseling and just giving people enough time off to process, right? Because if you don't take that time away to kind of collect yourself and you come back and you experience more and more traumatic incidents every day, and you wind up understanding that it affects officers just as much as it affects everybody else. We undergo
Yep.
repeated trauma. So I'm
Yes.
glad you
Yes.
have that.
Yeah.
yeah, it
What
was
what
I
definitely
think
a benefit.
Yeah. Go ahead, Craig.
I think like what Simone indicated, and I think John and Ben and we can all agree is when you have that officer who's killed in the line of duty, one of the things that immediately grips you is that this could have been me. And you ask, Simone asked, oh, why her, not why me? And when you are younger and just come on and just start this job, most of us came on when we were young, and like a lot of young people don't believe that we're invincible. We're really good at what we do and we take all the precautions, and then these incidents come in and ground us, like in the case of Nick Lee was driving to a call, which is something that we normally do, whether it's a detective, whether it's a patrol officer, or whatever your assignment is. And for whatever reason, it was his time. Um, it's a very hard thing to come to grips with when you are young in your 20s, thinking you're going to be invincible, and an event like this happens. I think what I take away from Nick was I had already been through it. I was a little bit older than a lot of Nick's peers, and I don't think I think for all of us who are in leadership positions who have been through something like this before, it's important that we give that insight to younger officers and also help them go through the emotions because they've never felt this kind of vulnerability. And with cases like, I mean, Dorner was out of character in the fact that we all felt that vulnerability. It wasn't gonna, it wasn't uh, at any point in time, and those officers, again, were not part of LAPD, had no linkage to LAPD, but they got their number was called, and it's hard for all of us to kind of process at this time that you can be a victim of random acts.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great point, Craig, because if you're in this business long enough, and particularly if you're with a large department, you will see it, and you will look at you'll look at people, and it's like Simone was saying, why her, why him, and then you look at and there is a bit of guilt because you're thinking, wow, that could have been me, and then you have to it does make you vulnerable because you will look at, and for the case of LAPD, when you have an officer of the caliber like a Randy Simmons, phenomenal shape, he's working SWAT, and he goes in to do something he's probably done 100 times, and the bullet hits him, and you start thinking, there was nothing that probably could have been done differently. Well, you can always say that afterwards, but when you start looking at, it just comes down to sometimes it's just it's not fair, but sometimes it's just your number. That's the nature of this profession. And as over the course of my career, I've looked and it's been some close calls for me. And had I been, a few inches over, or if
Yeah.
had I, been in a place prior to, it had just a whole bunch of things, and you start second guessing and thinking about it. And it really comes down to, you know, this profession, you have to understand that when you raise your right hand and you swear to that oath, it means a lot more than just a job. It means a lot more because you, at any given time, it could be you. I think for me as a chief, I had a newfound respect for all of those chiefs we look at the pictures of giving the flag to the family. There's a lot of things behind the scene that just I wasn't prepared for. And to this day, the hardest thing I've ever done in my 36 and a half years career was bending down and presenting the flag uh, to Keith Lawrence's mother. Bar none. I don't care what the situation was, how dangerous. That was the hardest thing I ever did in my career, for a whole host of reasons. But there's a lot of dynamics to an officer losing the life in the line of duty that goes to the core of what we've signed up to do.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep. Lindsay McCall along on Facebook says, I second that Detective Marquez experience or officers who have been through a traumatic experience should help guide folks going through it during their time. Absolutely.
That's a good point. What's funny is each one of these experiences really grounds you and brings you back to ground zero with all your training and everything, and you start to reflect on all the times where you had those close calls when you were driving, or all those close calls you had on incidents out there where you got lucky, right? And it worked out for you, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be like that
Right.
every time.
Right. Yep. Yep. And I was just thinking again, what you just said, Ben, and what Simone was saying earlier. Why her? Why not me? Gets you thinking, because her call, Officer Leaf's call, was a patrol call. When you're on patrol, what if I got sent to that call? I was on another call. How come I didn't get sent that call, or something like that? Just got have you thinking. If I would have shown up a little bit earlier, a little bit later, if I was doing this or doing that, all these things go through your mind, I'm sure, at that time. So
Yeah.
sure, it's
Yeah,
tough
and
to deal.
I think,
Yeah.
sorry,
There's a
I think
question.
for
Go
me
ahead. Go ahead.
too, uh,
Go ahead, Simone.
prior to Leith coming out, I was uh, one of probably two, maybe three female officers on East District prior to her coming out. And I had just moved into the community resource unit. Um, so just like a couple months prior to her coming out, I was on the street and, feeling like that any of those calls that I could have taken prior to her, or, what if I would have stayed on the street, or, just trying to process through that. Like it could have essentially been me. I've worked that area multiple
Yeah,
times and, so just, yeah, it feels like that.
yeah. Just the what
Let me
if
ask you
game.
this.
You can do that to till you blue in the face. So yeah,
How many of you, and I can speak for myself in this, how many do your families really grasp what you see and what you contend with on a day-to-day basis? And I struggled with, especially early on, I struggled with even talking about it with them. Like they had no idea what I saw that day when I came home, right?
yep,
And if you start talking about it with them, to see the looks on their faces, the horrified looks of them having to hear now what you have experienced. They don't want you to talk about it. They don't want to know about it.
Yeah,
yeah,
you know what? You make a great point, Ben. I always joke, and I mean, I'm sure Chief Thomas gets this too. One of the biggest questions, or one of the most common questions we get, is traffic stops. Now, I'm a detective. I'm a gang detective, and I haven't done a traffic stop in over 10 years. But to the vast majority of people, a traffic stop is what we do all the time. And that's very for the vast majority of us, that's not. I mean, although patrol and traffic is a function that we might have done at one time, I've also worked as a child abuse detective, or a sexual assault investigator. I've worked narcotics. I've worked gangs. So it's very hard because when you start that conversation, people will automatically ask you or sit there and, who did you pull over today? I didn't pull over anybody. I talked to a rape victim. And it starts, and it takes them a while to get up to that point if you really want to take that journey with them. Most of us don't want to take that journey with them. We just want to end our day, and it's a lot of that is working on your communication skills, having somebody that's with you who kind of understands that you just don't want to take that journey again. um, and Great communication. Great communication works well, but also time and place is a big thing too.
Yeah. Real quick, Pamela Jones on Facebook comments, I agree it's not fair when a loved one is taken away. The trauma still exists within my family and myself, and it's been 53 years. Hashtag Archie C. Bugs. Oh, yep, we live with it all the time. And Arminda Rojas on Facebook also comments, I experienced PTSD when my cousin was killed, and it's reactivated every time an officer is killed or shot. Have any of you on the panel experienced this as well?
I think we all do. How do you not? Because these are people that we knew. These are people that all of a sudden their presence isn't there anymore. So I think it's a matter, and it speaks to a point that was made earlier, the importance, and I think we need to do a much better job as a profession for wellness and for identifying PTSD and how it's manifested in officers. Generationally, for me, I started my career at the LAPD in 1984, and I can tell you, and Ben mentioned it, oftentimes, you dealt with something like the death of a colleague in the line of duty by having, a session where you're sitting around, and I don't drink, but sitting around discussing things or venting things through alcohol or through some other destructive means. So I think it's come a long way. It's much better as I listen to Simone, and I know what's in place in my own department and what's in place at LAPD and other departments. But still got a long way to go, because there were officers in my department that were pretty traumatized because they had to train Keith. He was his presence all of a sudden was just gone, and I had to actually put in place something that didn't exist at the university for my officers. I had to actually reach to LAPD and reach to get their support services for something distinctly missing in campus policing. So
Absolutely.
the wellness piece, and it has to be not just in the crisis. You can't just put something in place after. You have to have a process to deal with the wellness of the officers all the time, so that they're accustomed to talking about things. I remember clearly an officer that was killed in the line of duty at LAPD, Pratt, 77th, and I recall talking to him literally just before he was killed. And now all of a sudden I'm a young officer. I got no counseling. There was nothing available for me to deal with or in place for that. So I'm grateful things are in place now, but departments need to do a much better job in dealing with the stressors and actually allowing for officers to be vulnerable and talk about how that made them feel. Because back then, I wish I would have been able to talk to someone, but there was also the stigma of, well, you don't want to go off stress. You don't want to take
Yes.
time off. You don't want to go see a professional to help you deal with it. So all those stigmas were in place that prevented me from, as a young officer, saying, my friend was just killed. I just talked to him. We were talking about, sports, and now I'm at a radio call where he's not with us anymore. and nobody ever reached out to me and said, "Hey, how are you feeling?" I don't think that
Right.
many of the officers at 77 got anything.
Yeah.
Chief, you brought up a good point about that. At least, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, hey, you didn't want to find yourself on the rubber gun squad. You didn't want to be
Mhm.
pulled out of the field and the stigma that went with that. And even if you didn't drink, you had to be there anyway. You had to attend, right? Or you get ostracized. You weren't part of the group, right? And we come now, some 30 some years later today, I see how important it is and how much it's made a difference when we had officers that responded to a call of a murder suicide where a father had come home, killed his wife, and then his three children right there, and then killed himself. And what was unusual back when I started, which is now commonplace today, is we pulled those officers that responded to that scene. We immediately pulled them out of the field within hours and got them back to the station. We moved them away from the scene, got them out of uniform, and immediately, right there that day, started getting them services, right? Because those officers that had come out of that house, they had, first of all, they had to break a window to get in, and they could see three little boys lying in the living room, with gunshot wounds. And they went in there to try to treat them, and they couldn't. They were helpless. Those officers were broken when they came out of that house. And I take that back to some 30 years later when Officer Ronald Davis was killed, and the news took a picture of officers in a huddle crying because you couldn't cry, right? You had to absorb these things and keep a straight face and be about the business, right? So much that was the front page story. It wasn't the officer, or it was the picture of the officers that were hurt, that were wounded. And we did not have any support available to help us through that traumatic process then. And I'm so glad they have it now. But just like you said, Chief, smaller agencies don't have the same amount of resources. And suddenly, when you find yourself in that situation, now you're trying to backtrack and catch up to get to where you need to be. So I know that's tough.
And I think it's something has to be advocated for, because I don't care I don't care how small the agency is. It can happen in any city, any town. It doesn't matter, because we're talking about things that officers do every day: traffic stops, respond to calls for domestic violence. It doesn't matter, and we're seeing it at record rates now. So I think it's something that I'm so grateful that it is beginning to happen. But I also know there's a lot of work to be done. But I also know that it's something that it's a leadership thing. Departments have to have this. And you have to cut through the cultural, excuse my language, BS to get to it, because there's still a lot of that mentality. From my generation of officers, suck it up and get back out there and do the job. They didn't have that when I came on, so but that mentality is not healthy. It's not productive. It doesn't lend to longevity in the career. And I've seen where officers have committed suicide as a result of not being able to process PTSD. So it's a real problem.
I think that's such a great thing. One of the things that I took away from Nick, and I've kind of started that on my journey, is that, what police officers need to understand is what made you a great police officer, that resiliency that all great police officers have, um, doesn't necessarily serve you well as when you are a leader. And so if you are in a leadership spot, you really need to assume the leadership role. Nick Lee was a very big personality. He was obviously well liked. He was he had a great sense of humor. So he had a big presence in the circle of friends around him, and they're hurting, and they need you to, having been through it, to also to focus that energy um, and get them through that process, get them with services, get them through the professional help, uh, and help them along the way, but also to kind of focus everyone around you. You know, Nick was a great example of what can happen to you at the drop of a dime. I really, for those of you who are watching this podcast, you know, invest in that wellness, like Chief Thomas has said. You know, how we treat each other says a lot. And I think, you know, when you look at the Dorner incident, there was a lot of questions as how we treated each other. Now, I'm not saying that he was treated unfairly. Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted. But I think that every day, how we treat each other, it bears to question as we talk about wellness. Um, One of the things is that deaths like Nick Lee has done is kind of dialed me down. You know, we talked about, you know, that I'm from, you know, I've been around the block a little bit, and I was from the school where, you know, you have to suck it up, and you know, and you sign the
Suck it
contract, and
up.
this is part of
Hmm.
it. I really don't think that has a place now. I just really don't. I think, you know, if you're going to be a leader in this profession at this day and age, you need to do things differently. You really do. You need to be uh, somebody who has great wisdom, who has great advice, but you also need to help. And telling people just to push through their pain, you're not being a leader. You're not helping anybody at all. You need, and if you're going to have time on, then talk like you have time on, and get the people, be familiar with it. Have the phone
Right.
numbers, have the contacts in your phone, like I do now, so that if somebody, you know, shows up to that call like Simone did and is filled with different things, you know, you want to get her the help right then and there. And just like Ben talked about that incident, it needs to happen right there and now. And if you're a leader, you need to pick that up and run with it.
Yeah. Let me bring up this real quick. Sean Kennedy on Facebook says, I want to share the Guardian's Voice newsletter with your audience that focuses on mental health and wellness of police officers. Hope this helps someone out there. There's the link there. You can click that if you are on Facebook. Producer Lizzie, you want to bring up that other comment from Lindsay McCall about being a peer support? And she says she's a huge peer support advocate. I had a great support after my critical incident in 2018. I have to be proactive with our first responders and offer immediate resources when these major scenes happen. It helps when command is on board with this culture. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That suck it up culture, man. I tell you, the and here it is. Like I said, 30 years later, I have never forgotten it. The first call I responded to, where Officer Davis was killed, when we got back and officers were upset, the lieutenant on our watch basically said, "Suck it up." He said, "Hey, you know, this isn't the first officer that's been killed in the line of duty, and it won't be the last. And you got a job to do, right? And get back out there." And I remember how angry I was at hearing that there was like no sensitivity to this situation whatsoever, or to the trauma that we experienced out there as officers. It was suck it up and get back to work, right? And it took a long time to get us to where we are today. And just like you all have talked about with the alcoholism and the divorce rates, the suicides, and all the other issues, because those traumas manifest themselves in one form or another at work, right?
Right.
You're getting complaints, you're getting use of forces,
Mhm.
right? You're taking really risky behaviors, right? It's coming out one way or another, because this job is really unlike a lot of others. It's unique and it carries a lot of stress, right? And I'm not to say that um, it's all based on that, right? But the culture certainly supports or did support not providing resources for folks who have repeated stress, right? That is
Facts.
unlike any other stress. It's comparable to those in war zones, right? And the meat and military personnel who see a lot of, you know, death and broken bodies, except they only do it over a certain amount of time. Maybe, you know, you get a 6 month, a year deployment, whatever, and you get sent back. Sometimes you do it 2, 3 times. but a police officer could see this day in and day out over the course of decades.
20,
And that
30
just
years.
kind of
Yeah.
builds up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
You know, I think to
Oh,
Craig's point, he said something I think is worth reiterating, and that is how officers show up to work every day. You can't start talking about putting together a wellness program after there's a crisis. And officers are dealing with enough stressors in their personal life. They come to work, and it's incumbent of their peers, but it's also incumbent of leadership in those departments. I don't care what the rank, I don't care. We all are leaders by virtue of being in this profession. And it doesn't take much to say, hey, you're not looking like you're doing too well today. Let's talk.
right.
Because I agree. I'm definitely not going to support Dorner because I think he did a lot of damage. He just a lot of destruction, and I'm sitting here talking about him taking the life of one of my most promising officers and the devastation he did to the families that I know of, Keith and Monica's. But at the same time, who's to say if somebody hadn't saw, he didn't take that, he wasn't taking things too well, and somebody reached out and said, hey, look, you need to get a grip. You're going off the deep end. Let's talk. Let's get some help because we have people coming to work every day dealing with stuff. And I think that's where it starts because if you can prevent one officer from going down that route to suicide, if you can prevent one officer from going down that route to, a destructive home life, if you can do any of those things, you are actually still saving an officer's life. It doesn't have to be killed in the line of duty, but we all know there's some very destructive behaviors in this profession, and it doesn't start in the academy. Something happens from when the time they get out on the street over the course of their career that they're not processing the PTSD. They're not processing the child abuses that they're handling, the domestic violences that they're handling. That has to change internally. And that's not
Right.
a system that can be created. That's just caring about your partners. That's every bit as important as when you get in that patrol car with your partners. I know LAPD, it was always we had a partner. And you say, hey, where do you keep your backup? Hey, what are our signals if such and such happens? That's just as important. Those kind of tactical considerations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chief, you talked about, and Dale talked, or not Dale, but Craig talked about this as well, about the importance of command staff supporting wellness and that sort of thing. And that's important. But I would argue that the most critical component of it today is the first line supervisor, and the sergeant who sees those officers on a day-to-day basis, sees them out on calls, sees what's going on with them, and
Facts. Yep.
and has to have has to
Mm-hmm.
have the wherewithal to get in his business, to pull that officer aside and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, something's not right. What's going on with you? And to stay with it and not just accept that, well, we always do. Oh, everything's fine, Sarge. Nothing's going on. I'm good, right? But then you see it in their performance. You see either the productivity go down, right? You start to see complaints. You start to see all kinds of other issues that, as a commander, I'm not going to see because
No, you're
when I
not.
walk into a room, hey, I can sit at a table full of officers and say, "Oh, does anybody got any questions for me?" And what do you get, Chief?
Oh,
Right?
they dead silence, dead silence. But Ben, you bring up
Dead
Ben.
silence.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It is incumbent upon those supervisors that see those officers every day. I always tell my supervisor, you got to know your people. You got to know, when they come to work and they look a little like they're out of it. Like you said, you got to have the wherewithal to say, hey, let's talk. And sometimes you may have to say, you know what, I think it's best I send you home, get some rest, and sometimes it may mean you're going to go a little bit below deployment. That's okay. That's what
Yeah.
leadership is about. You care first and foremost about the people that are doing the
People.
job. But I do think that's that first line supervisor who handles that roll call briefing uh, has to be able to look at all those officers in that room and be able to gauge how are they doing and having conversations with them if something doesn't look quite right or feel quite right.
Yeah.
That's where it
Absolutely.
starts.
Yep. Yep. So I wanted to do this show really to pay tribute to the fallen officers that have, not just the ones that we're talking about here today, but the ones before them, ones that'll come after them, unfortunately. This past week was National Police Week, and that was instituted back in the Kennedy administration, and furthered on by presidents after that. So, and then at the end of last week was, let me get that lower third off there so we can all see what we're talking about here. A Peace Officers Memorial Day was May 15th. And then with next week being Memorial Day, I thought I'd sandwich this in here and let's talk about these officers, because here, this chart, I just got this today from the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund. To date, in 2021, we have had total fatalities, 124 peace officers nationwide die this year. And that's up 13% from last year, which was only 110 by this time last year. So, things are changing, and it's becoming more difficult to be a police officer. We all know the climate that's out there today. How do these events affect your agency as a whole? Do you guys still pay tribute to the officers that were fallen? Do you guys remember what happened? Remember the sacrifice that they did? Why don't you speak on that, Simone, real quick?
So for our department, we do our line of duty deaths from the start of, so we merged in 2007, and we became IMPD. So officers that passed away previously before the merge, we send out a email to our whole entire department of the incident, the date, photos, a write-up about what happened during that call that the officer got, and as well as the memorial where it took place, where the officer is buried. We do that for every one of our line of duty deaths that we have had. And then also for Deputy Jason Baker, Officer Layard, Officer David Moore, Officer Bradway, Officer Wren. These were the most recent deaths that we have had within our agencies, and we memorialize them through our Facebook, getting together with their families. They do memorial runs, bike rides. They do different events within our city to make sure that these officers and their legacies are never forgotten within our department in our city.
Absolutely. Got a pic here. You guys did a recent memorial there.
Yes.
Was that for Officer Leaf or?
This, yes, we got together. So when Officer Leaf passed, we were right in the COVID pandemic, and we weren't allowed to attend her funeral. So Indianapolis Motor Speedway, they opened up the speedway so that the police officers could attend a different type of tribute to her, but we weren't allowed to go into the gravesite. So on this day, this year, on April the 9th, we got together as an agency, and we came together so that we could memorialize her like we weren't able to do in 2020 when she passed away.
Good stuff. Chief Thomas, how did you guys memorialize Keith?
Yeah, well, Keith is the only officer we've ever had in our department's history to die in the line of duty. To keep his memory alive, one, there's a scholarship in his name that every year we have a car show that's become pretty popular, where we raise money based upon the car show. But every Police Memorial Week, we have a tribute in front of our station. We have a monument. We have a wreath that we put out not only that day but also on his birth date. And probably the most important thing I think I could do as a chief is I still check in with his parents. I'm still in contact, with his mother and his father, and also Monica Kwan's mother and father. So, part of it is just not forgetting the families. I made a commitment that I would never forget Keith, and we would never forget Keith. We have a mural inside our station, and it's a whole length of a wall with his picture on it. So it's a part of our history. Yeah, no officer can ever work at Department of Public Safety and not. We retired his badge. Even his locker will never be used again. So we have built into our very DNA of our department that he is someone that you cannot work at our department and ever not know about or pay tribute to.
You know,
Wow.
Chief,
Wow.
that's so important what you talked about the families and not forgetting those families and leaving them behind to continue to give them support. And I know on San Diego, um, obviously we've had multiple officers that have given their lives in the line of duty, and we definitely want to always honor and respect them. But there was one officer in particular for me, Officer Archie Buggs, who passed away on November 4th, 1978. He was shot by a couple gang members while out on patrol. And I was only 11 years old when he passed away. But when I came on the San Diego Police Department, they give you a tour through the POA, and they have photographs of every officer who was killed in the line of duty, and a little brief synopsis of what happened to them. And what stuck with me about Archie Buggs is he was the only officer on that board who looked like me, right? So that was really important to me, and I wound up working at the station in the area where it happened, and his picture is on the wall. And at that time, it was the only one on the wall, right? So I looked at his picture every day, and one of the things that was unique is that there was really nothing honoring him, right? Other than his picture was on the wall in the station, but there was nothing else out there. And I didn't know his family, and at a certain point, some older officers who had retired said, "Hey, it's really important that we find a way to honor Archie's legacy." And I took that on as a project, and I became very close with his family and helped kind of lead this charge until we got a station named after him, the substation building, and that was really done to kind of heal his family, who really felt he had been forgotten about, because it took
Yeah.
39 years
Yeah.
to get that done, right? But they're on the call today too. They've been responding, and I know that they've become family to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I appreciate them. We do whatever we can to help them, all right. And we can't forget those officers and those families, all of them in your
Mm-hmm.
agencies. Remember them. Do the extra
Mm-hmm.
things for them, even if it requires you sending somebody or going out in the middle of the night, right? That family feels that, hey, we love them and we haven't forgotten
Mm-hmm.
about them, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
one of the things I always will always send, you know, the Lawrence and the Quan family pictures of the tributes that we pay, But yeah, and I think one of the great things out of all of this is Kevin Lawrence, Keith's father, and I. He's become one of my closest friends. He's in Colorado, and I
Wow.
plan to visit him next month. But but I think that then you're so, because it's easy to do. And Craig, I got to give him credit because he honors some officers from 100 years ago, and he goes out to a cemetery, a long forgotten cemetery in East LA, and puts flowers on some officers that have been. And I have just such a great respect, because we have to. I don't care if it was last week or 100 years ago. We have to continue to pay tribute to their legacies.
I
Yes,
think
sir.
what he said is and I, for those of you who don't know, uh, uh, John has Chief Thomas has been a great historian. He's a great historian and a great researcher, and has found uh, you know, and to be honest, a very dark time in our history. A lot of people don't know that the LAPD has been around since the 1800s, and when LAPD started, segregation was still the law of the land. So a
Yep.
lot of black police officers who had immense courage and blazed the way for all of us to be there and didn't get treated right at all. Served
Internally or
with
externally.
internally and externally,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
That part.
through
That
and
part.
and through Chief Thomas's research, we found the locations of the first two black police officers killed in the line of duty in the 1920s, uh, and a tragic reflection on what we were as a society. They were buried. The first one was buried in an unmarked grave. The second one,
Mm.
both of them buried in the black section because black people were not allowed to be buried with white people at that time. And these are officers killed in the line of duty, were not given the same rights as white people. And so what I try to do is I try to, so every memorial, police memorial week, I go and put flowers on the grave. Obviously, it's not going to erase the racism and the structural bias that was at that time. But it's important for all of us to remember, because time will go on, and the families are left to mourn these officers, and so we have to do our best to remember, not just now, but for a lot of these men and women, they were the first. They were the ones who paved the way for us in the early 1900s, and we have to do our best to remember their sacrifice and to keep on remembering and telling their story
Every day. Every day.
every
Appreciate
day.
that, Craig. Appreciate that, Craig. Pamela Jones again on Facebook says, "Speak knowledge, Kelso." That's Ben. You never gave up and made sure he was not forgotten, and now he will be remembered, forever remembered, and along and made history in the archives of the city of San Diego and the SDPD in the 131-year history now. All right, so we'll give applause to the captain there.
I think I would rather give that to Archie's family for hanging
Yes.
in there
Yeah.
and
Yes.
having the strength to stick with us when I finally started talking about it and not look at me like, oh man, what are you talking about? It's been over 30 years. Nothing's happened. Why should I believe you? And they had faith and they stuck with me, and they actually gave me the strength to keep going because it wasn't easy. There was a
No.
Right.
ton of pushback. There was a ton of pushback, right?
I can imagine.
So, and I almost quit several times, but having to go back to them and explain to them every time that we got turned down on something was like a kick in the teeth, So, I think about Simone with Officer Lee and seeing her son that, man, I mean, there's going to be a lot of years that somebody's going to need to be there for that young man.
Yes.
Right? Because I don't even think he even understood when it happened what actually took place, but he will eventually, And there's nothing I would like to see better than in 20 years, this young man graduating from college with his degree or whatever he's doing, but to know that he made it and he wasn't abandoned and left behind.
Absolutely. And the Lee family, uh, her parents have been phenomenal in just allowing us to shower them with love and support and sending them flowers and allowing us to show up and have lunch and dinner with them. They have welcomed us with open arms, and they understand that they are a part of our family. Her son Zane is a part of the family forever. And some of
Ever.
the women on the department, his first day of kindergarten, his first day back to school, his first birthday without his mom, they showed up in support. They got other surrounding agencies and they showered him with gifts and love and support to let him know that he wasn't forgotten. And that's not something that we're just going to do because it's fresh, but that's something that we plan to continue to do because, again, she's the first African American female officer to die in the line of duty for the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department.
Yes. Yes. Appreciate that, what you're doing there. So before we get out of here real quick, let's talk about the officers that we're talking about here today. Let's bring some humanizing for our audience real quick and talk about something fun about them. I know Craig, you talked about Nick being a big personality. I got some pictures there. He worked out of Hollywood, right? And
Yes, worked out of Hollywood. Nick had it. For those of you who don't know him, Nick had this. It's funny because he had a funny sense of humor. Loved telling jokes. Would never laugh at his own jokes. For a lot of guys with sense of humor, we kind of laugh at our own jokes. But Nick had this thing, and he would purposely time it. And he'd sit there, say something, and he'd sit there and look around, and he'd with this serious look on his face, and it's like, are you joking? And he'd sit there and he had this dry sense of humor, and then he would sit there and insert Spanish, and he's Korean, and it's like, so you hear this Asian officer sit there purposely, and he would sit there and everything would be off color, and it was just, I mean, he was just a joy, just a
Yeah.
really big joy to work with. You couldn't ask for anybody to work this profession of ours, which, as we all talked about earlier, can be a real grind. Working with Nick Lee was a very good break from the routine that we normally see. Uh, he is surely missed. One of the things that I forgot to tell you is after he passed away, for those of us who work Hollywood, we're totally familiar with the Walk of Fame. Well, Hollywood put a star in front the Hollywood police station for Nick Lee.
I got
So
that.
it's from the same company that makes the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and so Nick Lee is forever going to be in Hollywood's Walk of Fame. For those of you who visit the LAPD police station, he's right there in front, and truly one of a really great thing to do, and um, a great memento to give to him and his family.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that. Simone.
For Officer Leith, she was definitely the life of any environment that she was in. She could walk in the room, and she was definitely bringing sunshine with her. Uh, she was a big picture thinker, loved family, loved the community. Any chance she got to help somebody reach back and be the difference, she was willing to do that without question, without getting any recognition. She showed up for her community. She walks in the footsteps of her father, who is prior law enforcement, and wears a badge proudly. He, when she was younger, came home with his police car and showed her his police car, and she got to come outside and see the lights and hear the sirens. And from that moment, she knew she wanted to be the police. And to just be able to have an experience with her, to be in her presence, to say that I knew her, I was able to work on the same district as her, to be able to speak with her in different conversations. I know that her light for the city, for her family, for the community will never be dimmed, because of what she gave to our city, the legacy that her mom and the values and morals that her parents instilled in her. She lived that each and every day proudly. So she made us proud.
Absolutely. Chief Thomas.
Two things come to mind when I think of Keith. One, his immense love for Monica. They were engaged, and it's actually on YouTube. His proposal to Monica. It's the whole thing where he put roses throughout the apartment. It's very touching. If you ever want a tearjerker, his actual proposal to Monica is actually posted. But I think his great love for her, and even as an officer, he drove all of our just everybody. If he spoke to Keith for 5 minutes, once he fell in love with Monica, that's all he wanted to talk about. He talked and professed his love for Monica. They came together through basketball. They were both collegiate basketball players, and Keith was a heck of a basketball player. I mean, there's a well-known buzzer beater where he took the basketball through the course of like 3-4 seconds and put up a shot and won a elite championship. But they both loved basketball. Monica was a basketball player at Cal State Long Beach, and Keith was at Concordia. So they came together through basketball, but so the great love for each other, and basketball, But he was a heck of a cop as well.
Yeah.
Very, very outstanding officer.
Yeah. And I saw that Monica was also an assistant coach over at Cal State Fullerton, their basketball
Yeah,
team. So,
yeah,
yeah,
hmm
basketball was big in their lives.
yes,
Glad to hear it.
yes.
A few more comments before we get out of here. Claudia Harris says it's one thing to talk and see what a lot of social media, see a lot of that on social media, but honoring our fallen and supporting the mental well-being of the ones involved in trauma of a line of duty death. You are all walking the talk and showing the future members of our department. Appreciate that comment there, Claudia.
Thank you.
And I believe we had another comment there. Producer Liz is going to bring up. Ms. Rojas on Facebook says, thank you for having this podcast. Thank you for that. May God Almighty continue to strengthen, guide, and protect you all. We appreciate that, Arminda. All right, appreciate that. So I guess we got one more. Lindsay McCall Long. She says, this is a wonderful conversation. It's a difficult subject, but much needed. Thank you for each and every one of you for what you do and what you have sacrificed. Appreciate that comment as well. All right, what do you want to leave our guests with, our audience with on the way out here? We'll start with you, Simone. What do you want the audience to know about what we do on a daily basis, what you dealt with in the line of duty death of your colleague?
One thing I could say is just understand that police officers are human. We are affected by everyday tragedy. And if you have a family member or loved one or a close friend that is in law enforcement, just wrap your arms around them, be there in support for them, because there are challenging days, there are challenging times. And without a great support system, without the people that care for us and love us in the community, we couldn't do this job. It would be too overwhelming to do it. I would just also like to say to the officers who show up every day and continue to take their runs and continue to show up for the community, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We can't say it enough because we know that it could be any one of us. And so thank you for showing up when our community needs us the most.
Amen. Amen on that. Greg?
I would like to leave on something that we touched on, which is wellness. Wellness starts. It's not just the policy, or it's not just an idea that we all have, but wellness starts with the person to the left and person to the right. Invest in your people. Invest in your friendships. As all the examples that you heard of today, those things can change in a moment's notice. And what you don't want is regret. Did you invest in the person to the left? Did you invest in the person to your right? Because that's the question you're going to be asked, after something like this happens. And we all turn around and we can do better in investing in ourselves and investing in the wellness of each other. And so take care of each other. It sounds very simple, but it takes a conscious effort. And if anything you take away from these conversations is treat each other well.
That part right there. Chief Thomas?
Gosh, I don't know whether I can add to much of what Simone and Craig said because they put it so well. The only thing I would add is that in these very trying times, keep, I think, one, we do serve the public. These officers, signed on to do a very difficult job, and they knew they were going toward danger, and they would do it again. I dare say, any officer that was killed in the line of duty, if they had the opportunity to sacrifice their lives, they probably wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, it's a part of the DNA of what officers do. So in these very difficult times where there's a lot of animosity and anger directed toward the profession, keep in mind these are the people. In spite of all this, they're still putting on that uniform. They're still going out there, and they are still willing to give their life and sacrifice their lives for people that they don't even know. Even the most angry, ardent person against law enforcement at a time like this, officers will still give their lives for that person too. So I think that's something to keep in mind during these difficult period that we're going through, that those very officers, they know of the anger out there. They know of the animosity, but they put that uniform on and they respond to those calls just the same, and they will still die for people to protect others that they don't know. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind at a time like this. But Simone and Craig said it perfectly. Wellness and just knowing that these officers are committed unto death to do
Yes.
the job of protecting and serving the public.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you for everybody that chimed in today and that viewed the show with us. It's really needed conversation. I'm glad we had it. I thank each and every last one of you for out there watching us and you guys for joining us here on the show and letting everybody know about these officers and what's going on through their heads and through yours. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Wow. That was some good stuff there today. Ben, what'd you think? Your first time out? No, we're still here. We're still closing here. We're still live, so
Wow.
it's just me and you. What'd you think about that?
Hey, it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
Just no script, no nothing. Just speak from the heart. Say what you feel, what's on your mind, and see what people think.
Yeah. I loved it. Thank you for coming on. We had a good show today. We're going to be doing some more together. Lizzie, the spot's still yours though. Hope you get well soon.
Hey, that's
we
right.
love you.
That's right.
Yes.
Hey, you attract more viewers with her anyway. Right? She's making you look good.
Thank you for everybody for joining us. We appreciate
I'll
you.
be the substitute.
Yeah, substitute. You did good. We're sitting, keeping her chair warm. We'll see you next time on Black and Blue Live. Thank you everybody for joining us. We out. Peace.